We've already recognized some of the outstanding women here. We're joined on the dais by a young lady who ran for city council here in New York. For you that are from out of town, she had no chance, they said, of winning. She comes from my section of Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brownsville. And when I was growing up, Brownsville was the #1 impoverished ghetto in the country. Not that we was competing, it was just a situation. And we, 1199, and some of us went to Brownsville, and they said she couldn't win. She ran against one of the more formidable political operations in this state. And she won with almost 70% of the vote. She is working with Tamika on this campaign against misogyny in music and working with National Action Network. And they had allowed me to be the token man on the program today. That's why I brought Reverend Jackson, so they couldn't talk about I was the only token, so we were given allowances. Councilwoman Darlene Millie. And in the audience, we have an outstanding woman, activist, fighter for a long time, Assemblywoman Annette Robinson. Stand up, Assemblywoman. There are others that I'll recognize throughout the afternoon. As we stated at the beginning of the conference, it was our intention to hear from all of the candidates that are in the race in the Democratic primaries for president, to hear them in a substantive way, not just a flash, and not in a way that would be engaged in people coming in to pounce on them. As I've said to every candidate that has appeared so far, if you are not supportive of them, those that have not made a decision, I want you to hear them. If you cannot contain your decision, then you can leave and hit an exit. The biggest, baddest heckler here is me. Nobody else allowed to heckle at our conference. But this particular candidate has spoke at this convention most years that we've had it, and probably would be here whether they were running for president or not, because they've been here before they were running for president. When this candidate ran for the Senate in New York, many said she could not deliver. Now even her most vociferous critic has said she has surprised them with her diligence and her sense of being above the fray and getting the job done. She and I have not always agreed, but we have never been disagreeable. We have always sat down and talked, and we've always been able to respect each other's views. You can respect people if they say what they mean and mean what they say, and don't patronize you or not tell you something in a disingenuous way. I told a reporter the other day, they said to me, you have dealt now through the last several years with Senator Clinton and then former President Clinton. What's the difference? I said, well, the difference is that President Clinton will talk to you and give you a lengthy explanation of why he is about to tell you no. Senator Clinton will tell you no and then explain why she told you no. I don't know which one is better for your ego, but I think we need leadership as we look at all of these candidates at this time, that every constituency in America can be regarded and respected. And as I said before her coming, as I said yesterday, the day before when Senator Edwards spoke and Governor Richardson spoke and and Senator Biden spoke last night, that it is appropriate to me that Mr. McCain would go to a Jerry Falwell's college and talk, and Mr. Giuliani go and talk to Pat Robertson and others. Then why is it so different if Mrs. Clinton or Senator Obama or Senator Biden come to constituencies that are affiliated with Reverend Jackson or me or Mark Morial? You can't have an America that only some sides of America are considered. And when others are considered, it is considered an inclusive thing to do. But when other sides are, they are demeaned as kissing rings and placating and bowing. No, maybe it's time for all Americans to be in the conversation so we can deal with all American problems and all American concerns. What we've seen, the absolute massacre in Virginia, what we've seen with the language crisis, it's time for us to have real conversations. And those that want to save this country need to all be in the room, even if we enter through different doors and even if we have different opinions. So it is my honor to present to you the junior senator of the state of New York, candidate for president, and a frequent speaker at the National Action Network Convention, Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's good to be back and to be with all of you again. I was trying to scratch my brain to remember when I ever said no to Al. I've enjoyed our relationship. We've had a very positive working partnership on behalf of many of the issues and causes that we both care about. And I'm delighted to be back again, Reverend Sharpton. And this dais has some very distinguished people who have a record of service to this country, an understanding that the struggle is never over, the march continues, and I'm honored to be here with them. I've known Reverend Jackson for many years, and I'm delighted to see you here, Reverend Jackson. I've known Reverend Richardson for many years, and I'm so pleased that you continue to chair the National Action Network. And we have some young people. I consider Brenda kind of a young person. We have young people like Sujay, who has taken a leadership position in the clergy here in New York that is not only significant for her, but for all of us as women. And I'm very grateful to Reverend Cook for being such an example. I want particularly to thank Tamika and Darlene for taking on the issue that is on the forefront of everyone's minds today. We're going to need your leadership, and we're going to need the perseverance that it will take to change minds, attitudes, and hearts. And I want to recognize my longtime friend Charlie King, the executive director, and his first-class assistant, his daughter, Nicole, who's here. How many of you have ever heard Marian Wright Edelman speak before? So I think you have an idea as to why she has been such a strong force on the Mississippi Bar, had worked with Dr. King, with Reverend Jackson and other leaders of the Civil Rights Movement, had been involved in the Poor People's March on Washington, had helped to respond after the tragic assassinations of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy, and who took her experience and her passion and put it to work on behalf of children. And I had never heard about her before I read this very small article about her. And then just as these things happen in life, about a week later I saw a sign on the bulletin board saying that Marian Wright Edelman was going to be at Yale to speak. And I thought, oh, that's the woman I read about. I think I'll go listen to her speak. And that was my first time to hear her speak. And when she finished speaking, I went up to her and I introduced myself and I told her I was a law student, and I asked her if she had any jobs for law students that summer. And she said, well, I can give you a job, but I can't pay you. And I needed to make money because I was putting myself through law school. And I said, well, if I can figure out how to get paid, can I come to work for you? And she said, sure. So I applied for a Law Student Civil Rights Research Council internship. And I was very honored to receive one. So I called Mary and I said, well, I've got a way to be paid, and can I still come? And she said, sure. During the years that I worked for the Children's Defense Fund and then served on the board, I have always been moved to action by her call to conscience. She doesn't let you off the hook. Every single day, she wakes up trying to figure out what we're going to do to give children health care, to give them a better education, to keep our families together so that children get what every child needs, a loving family that gives them guidance and discipline and attention and a better start in life. And when I went to work full-time after I graduated from law school, I was part of some of the work that the Children's Defense Fund has done, which a lot of people may not really know about. You know, back in 1973, when I started working there, after having worked for 2 summers for Marion, I could look back and say to myself that, you know, we had helped gather information to try to prevent the Nixon administration from giving tax deductions and favorable treatment to all of the segregated academies that were springing up around the South. That we had helped to try to organize a great national movement on behalf of migrant laborers and their children who are still being treated as though they were slaves in Pharaoh's Egypt. We went door to door in neighborhoods looking for missing children, and by that I mean that if you looked at census numbers and you compared it to school enrollment, there was a gap. Where were these children? And it wasn't just a couple, it was millions of children who were not in school. Some of them dropped out and nobody knew where they were. Some of them back in the early 1970s were taken out of school to help support families. Many of them were children with disabilities. They were blind children, deaf children, children in wheelchairs, children with disabilities that the schools said, well, I'm sorry, you can't come to school. So we would be knocking on doors and asking, do you have a school-age child who's not in school? And I would be invited into people's homes where I would meet a little girl in a wheelchair or a little blind boy, and the family would say, there's nowhere for that child to go. And that work helped to serve as the basis for passing legislation in our country, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, known as special education, so that we would never turn our backs on any single child. Every child would be given an education. So the work of the Children's Defense Fund has been some of the most important that has gone on in our country, because it is not only hard to understand, it is indefensible that we have millions of children without health insurance. We have millions of children who are still dropping out of school. We have millions of children who are abused and neglected. And what are we going to do about it? Well, I hope that the call of action that Marion gave us today will cause each of us to think about what more we can do. You know, we were making progress during the 1990s. It wasn't perfect, but we were lifting more people out of poverty than at any time. We started the Children's Health Insurance Program, something that I worked on, so that we could help get children the health care they deserve to have if their families couldn't afford it and the employers didn't pay for it and they weren't eligible for Medicaid. And in the last 6 years, we have seen a persistent assault on every program designed to help. And it's not just designed to help the poor. It's not just designed to help working families. It's designed to help middle-income families too, because we're not making progress among the majority of Americans. People are working harder than ever before, and wages are flat. People are not getting the health care and the pensions they used to get. You look out across our country, it's very clear what has happened. Our tax system, our government contracts, everything has been skewed to help those who are already privileged and powerful at the expense of everybody else. Now, you can do one of two things in the face of that. You can walk away from it and just say there's nothing I can do. Or you can become engaged. And there's a couple of different things to do about being engaged. One is you can just be real upset and yell at your TV set. I do that, you know. Now that Bill and I have TiVo, we rewind it so we can yell again. You know, it's just almost hard to believe some of the things that are happening, isn't it? I mean, how does one explain the string of disasters that have been caused by or contributed to by our own government? You know, how could any government take a natural disaster like Katrina and turn it into a national disgrace? How could we see the amount of money that has gone in tax cuts to those who do not need them, including my husband and me? You know, we never knew that we were such favorites of President Bush until Bill started making money. Every time we turn around, he's trying to give us another tax cut. And where is it coming from? Well, I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from our children. It's coming from the poor. It's coming from the middle class. And it's coming from the future. We are mortgaging the future. We are borrowing from our children and our grandchildren. It's like you decide that you're going to borrow money to go to Europe, as opposed to borrowing money to buy your house or to put some repairs to your roof before it collapses. Well, one, you know, we would say, I think, that that's not exactly a smart investment. Go to Europe when you got the money. Don't borrow the money to go to Europe. The other is an investment to keep your house safe and well repaired. The American house is falling down. Our foundation is crumbling. The building blocks that made America what it has become over years of effort are slowly being eroded. You know, when you talk about the progress we've made, we can all say there's more to be done, but the American middle class was an invention of this country that has never happened anywhere else in the world. You can find rich people anywhere in the world, and unfortunately you can find poor people. But you can't find people like all of us who came from or worked our way into the middle class and who were able to take advantage of opportunities because we not only had our hard work, our ambition, our motivation, and our families in our corner, we had a village. We had teachers. We had coaches. We had neighbors. We had preachers. We had people who were there on our side, and we thought we had our government in our corner as well. It may have acted too slowly and may have made mistakes along the way, but you know, I was born into a middle-class family in the middle of the country, in the middle of the last century. And I know that I felt growing up that things were changing for the better because we all knew we had to. It wasn't easy, but it happened. You know, I wasn't on the front lines of the civil rights movement the way Jesse and Marion were, but I'm a beneficiary of it. I'm standing here today running for president because of the changes that people like them helped our country to make. So we have to ask ourselves now, well, what are the goals we're going to set for ourselves and our children? What is it we want our country to do in our time now? I'm running for president because I want to set some of those goals again. I want to get people to feel like we're in this together again. I want to set the goal of universal health care coverage, starting with our children. If we cannot give our children health care, then shame on us. And I believe that we have a chance in the next 20 months, even before this president moves on. I've introduced legislation with the chairman of one of the committees in the House, Congressman John Dingell, and we will provide health insurance to all 9 million children who are not insured. Contrast that with President Bush's budget, where he wants to start cutting children off of children's health insurance. He has, if he gets his way, a plan to cut 500,000 children off of health care. Well, we're not going to let that happen, but we want to go further. We want to stop him, and we want to make it possible for every family to have the guarantee of insurance so that the Children's Defense Fund doesn't have to bring stories like these 3 young boys to our attention. And you know what? We can pay for it. You know, we can pay for it even while we still have the current occupant of the White House. I'll tell you one way we can pay for it. We are paying $65 billion to insurance companies in Medicare, more than anybody else gets to take care of seniors. Basically, it's a little bit of an incentive, that's the nice way of saying it, for them to take care of seniors when there is money in Medicare to take care of our seniors. And we can take that money and we can put it in children's health right now. All we need is to have the Congress act with us and do it with enough fervor and as many votes as we can get to prevent the president from vetoing it. Because the president would rather take our tax dollars and give it to insurance companies than to give it to children to be insured. And that has to end. And we could end that this year if we get your help to make it a priority. We need to set a goal of making college affordable for every child again. It is out of the reach of most of our students now. Everywhere I go throughout our state, throughout the country, that's what I hear about. Hard-working families that have saved and scrimped, they can't afford it. There's not enough aid like there used to be when I was going to college, not enough scholarship money. And what we've been learning about the loan programs, you know, conflicts of interest, people taking stock in these companies and then turning around and trying to get students and colleges to sign up. The money being siphoned off from what it should be intended for, which is to make it possible for hard-working students from middle class and working families to be able to afford to go to college. It's in everybody's interests if our young people go to college, isn't it? And so we need to start making that a national priority again. We also need to set a goal of universal preschool. Every child should have access to preschool so that child can be prepared so that he or she is ready to learn. Too many children still come into school and they're so far behind when they get to kindergarten, first grade, they never catch up. You know, and as Marion said, and I bet some of you have been or are teachers, if a child can't read by 3rd or 4th grade, that child starts to feel like he's not smart, he can't do it. Then in order to protect themselves, they withdraw from school, and then pretty soon they're so far behind that we now then have a behavior problem or a dropout on our hands, don't we? If we took seriously the challenge of preparing every child for school, we would get better results. And we're going to fix No Child Left Behind, which has been a tremendous burden on so many schools, and our teachers have been put into an impossible position. We need to make sure every child has a chance to learn, but we don't do it by punishing the teachers and the students and the schools if they're making an honest effort to provide a quality education. They need to be held accountable, but they need to be given the resources in order to get the job done. There's so much work to be done in our country. You know, we have to have an energy policy that takes us away from our dependence on foreign oil. It is way past time to stop sending billions of dollars to regimes that then use that money against our own soldiers, against Americans, against our interests around the world. We need to deal with global climate change. That's not just about somebody else's problem in 100 years. That's about what's happening right now in the world. Diseases moving north, the deserts spreading, more intense storms. We need to face up to the fact that we are stewards of God's creation, and we have an obligation to make sure we don't pass on this wonderful world that we did nothing to create in worse shape than when we found it. That is a call to action for people of faith and people everywhere. We have to reform our government. The abuses that have gone on in the last 6 years, I don't think we know the half of it yet. You know, when I walk into the Oval Office in January 2009, I'm afraid I'm going to lift up the rug and I'm going to see so much stuff under there. What is it about us always having to clean up after people? But this is not just going to be picking up socks off the floor. This is going to be cleaning up the government, clearing out the deadwood and the political cronies, the people who left all of our fellow citizens along the Gulf Coast to fend for themselves and to this day have not made a commitment to rebuild New Orleans and the places that have been so devastated. And you know, we're going to get to the bottom of these no-bid contracts and all these special interests and all these favors that have transferred billions of dollars into the pockets of all of these big companies in Washington, the most prominent of which is Halliburton. All the money that Halliburton has made off of this tragic war, and then they pick up and move their CEO and their corporate offices from the United States of America to Dubai. It is time for us to say that if you're going to work for the United States government, you're going to support the people who live in this country, and you're going to support those who we send into battle and harm's way. Enough with the no-bid contracts, with the fraud and the abuse and the waste. Now, and one thing we can all agree on is that no young person who wears the uniform of the United States of America should be treated like they are being treated at Walter Reed and other places when they come home. Last week, I spent an hour with 50 young men up at Fort Drum, which is up in northern New York. It's the home of the 10th Mountain Division. These young men have gone to Iraq, they've gone to Afghanistan. They are among the best of our young people. And the stories they told me, every one of them has been wounded or injured. They told me about losing medical records. One young man said, you know, ma'am, I was wounded in an attack on a convoy in Baghdad. I had very good care when I was taken to the field hospital, and I was on one of these gurneys, lying flat on my back, hooked up to the IVs, and I'm going to the airplane to take me to the military hospital, and somebody comes up and puts a packet of information on my chest and says, soldier, here are your medical records, don't lose them. No. He said, well, ma'am, I didn't make it to the hospital with those medical records. I was unconscious on the plane. Another young man told me that he signed up for the special insurance that a lot of these young soldiers sign up for in case anything happens to them in order to help tide them over and help their families. Can't get anybody to answer the phone. Insurance company's not paying those claims. I met another young soldier who said to me, you know, I had serious injuries and they're being taken care of, but what bothers me is you know, I was so affected by the bomb blast that my brain is just not working right yet. We have thousands of these young men and women affected by something called traumatic brain injury. And I've introduced legislation, and I've been working to get the government to start recognizing this and taking care of these people the way they need and taking care of their families, because the families are the caregivers for them when they go home. But of course, the most important thing we can do is to start bringing them home, and to bring them home as quickly as possible and do it in a way that forces this president to change course. Now, part of the problem, of course, is he doesn't intend to do that, does he? He is set upon his policy, and we have passed legislation in the Congress. We have certainly done everything we know to do to try to get his attention. but I don't know whether he will end this war that he deliberately started. And we have to keep the pressure on, and we particularly have to keep the pressure on Republican members of the Senate and the House, because they have to understand that people are watching them. If he does not extricate us from Iraq before he leaves office, as president, I will do it as soon as I am inaugurated. You know, we have a lot more repair work to be done around the world, don't we? I don't know that we've ever had our country held in such low regard. And you know, that's dangerous, because we need people to work with us to solve the problems that we confront. You know, we can't deal with the terrorists who attacked our city without help from people who want us to be able to stop them. We can't deal with global climate change or HIV/AIDS or any other problem unless we have friends and allies. It is time to get back into the business of creating friends and allies, to quit alienating so many people around the world. And it's going to take everybody working together to make that happen. You know, I want to have these goals as your president, but we're all going to have to be part of meeting them. When I say we want universal health care, we're all going to have to take better care of ourselves. And we're going to have to be really watchful of how healthy our children are. We're going to get them health care, but then we got to make sure they stay healthy. We have young children who are being diagnosed with diabetes, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old children. That's a terrible, terrible sentence for these young children to bear their entire life. We got to figure out how we're going to approach that. And I know my husband was here talking about what he's trying to do. You know, when we talk about education, we've got to convince our young people to take education seriously. And that does mean kind of shutting out the media and all the messages that come that really divert our attention. And as we look around the world, we're all going to have to be ambassadors of America's best values. We have lots of examples of that. You know, Marion was talking about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, two women who we can claim in New York, both of them. You know, we can claim them. But it doesn't do any good just to have them in the history books. We got to learn from them. Right. We have to look at their example and ask ourselves, well, what can we do? How do we exercise that courage today? Yeah. You know, Harriet Tubman, when she got her way to freedom, did not have to go back down south and lead others to freedom, did she? No. She could have said, well, thank goodness, I'm safe, Lord, thank you. But she said, no, I'm going back. And she'd go back and she'd tell people to meet her in a grove of willows or on the side of a creek, and she'd get everybody gathered up. And then she'd say to them, you know, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens, keep going. If you hear the dogs, you hear the gunshots, keep going. Keep going to freedom. Do not look back. And when she told them that, she gave them a reason to believe that they could be free, that they could make it across that river, that they could go through whatever dangers awaited them. Well, what are we telling ourselves to do when we say keep going? Are we going to keep going till we get every child insured? Are we going to keep going till we get every child ready for school? Are we going to keep going when we get every child to be able to afford to go to college? Are we going to keep going till we end the war in Iraq? Are we going to keep going till we take care of our soldiers? We got to keep going till we get to that promised land. Now, I know we can do this. We've done it before. There is no reason we cannot do it again. So I ask you to join me on this journey. You know, I'm proud to be a woman running for president. Of course, I couldn't be anything else running for president. I met earlier this morning with Coach Vivian Stringer from Rutgers. And we owe that extraordinary woman a debt of gratitude. She and her young players taught us all a lesson. You know, when you hear all this stuff on the radio and you see it on TV, you know, Reverend Sharpton and Reverend Jackson and I, you know, we get our share of all that incoming fire, and after a while you just tune it out, don't you? You say, oh, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to that. But it took these extraordinary young women to say enough is enough.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And we need to stand with them and be clear that as women, we will no longer put up with the degradation and demeaning treatment that too often is visited upon our girls and women.
Yeah.
So yes, I am proud to be a woman, and I hope that by my running, other young girls and women can think about how they keep going, what barriers they break through, what their possibilities are for the kind of lives they want to lead. But I am running for president primarily because I think I'm the best qualified and experienced person to do the job that needs to be done. And I want you not only to be involved in my campaign, but much more importantly, to be involved when we take back our country, because we're going to need everyone to play a role. America cannot do what America needs to do in this century unless we get back to believing in ourselves and believing that together we are stronger than when separated and divided. Because there are forces that want to keep us divided, that want to pit us one against the other. And we're not going to let that happen. We are going to send a clear message in this election that we're not going to be deterred. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going until we get people involved who've never been involved before. People who understand that if they stay on the sidelines, we're not going to change a thing. But if everybody decides right now to participate, we can do what has to be done. We can cast these votes, and we can change this country. I'm asking you to be part of that great adventure with me. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Let me say, Reverend Jackson has to leave. I don't want press, you know, Senator Clinton talked about how the press shoots at us. Let me make it clear. Reverend Jackson is not walking out. He has to leave. We have not had candidates answer questions, Senator Clinton, so we cannot do it for you. They would say that I was leaning your way. So she and Tamika and I will escort her out, and we will resume the 4 o'clock session on our home ownership.